Welcome to Nightmare Narratives. This story's called Art of the Hitcher. Every ride has a cost. For Harvey, it's art. For you, it's your face. Part 1. Arlie. Something deep within Harvey had snapped, a realization dawning upon him that he could no longer remain passive in the face of the unfolding crisis in his mind. He had always carried supplies of medicines, meticulously prepared just in case of emergencies that might arise unexpectedly. Now, as the urgency of the situation pressed upon him, Harvey found himself operating almost on autopilot, instinctively stocking his bag with everything he could need for an animal emergency, carefully selecting each item with a sense of determination and urgency, ensuring not to overlook anything in his frantic preparations. All he could think about was the overwhelming urge to go for a drive, a powerful compulsion that consumed his thoughts and left him with no clear destination in mind. He had no idea where he was going to drive to, but the need to escape the confines of his current situation pushed him to get in the car and drive to anywhere that might offer him a sense of freedom and relief from the weight of his worries. He felt an intense desire to escape from it all, to leave behind the insane hassle of traffic and the relentless hustle and bustle of the city that had become stifling and oppressive. With that thought in mind, he made his way onto the main highway, setting his sights on the long and winding route towards Queensland, a considerable distance from South Australia, as he welcomed the open road ahead and the promise of solitude. He had put petrol in his car the day before, but now the thought of petrol seemed the furthest thing from his mind, as if eclipsed by the weight of his current thoughts and worries. His mind had become like a blank shell, devoid of coherent ideas or emotions. It was as if all thought processes had shut down entirely, leaving him with only the simple task of focusing intently on the road ahead. He was mesmerized by the dotted lines that stretched endlessly in the middle of the asphalt, each blurring together as he drifted deeper into a trance-like state. However, his bodily functions soon asserted their dominance, making it clear that he needed to stop and relieve himself. With a sense of urgency, he pulled over to the side of the road, hopped out of the car, and discreetly relieved himself behind a nearby tree. After taking a moment to collect himself, he climbed back into the car, restarted the engine, and resumed his journey, the hum of the tires on the highway now grounding and comforting. He was out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by vast stretches of empty land and the occasional distant tree, when his car began to splutter ominously, a series of coughs and sputters signaling an impending breakdown. Finally, he glanced down at the petrol gauge, and a sinking feeling washed over him as he realized the needle firmly nestled on empty. He only had enough petrol left in the tank to maneuver the car to the side of the road, where it sat stranded, helpless, and silent. His mind, which had been adrift in a fog of thoughts and distractions, was jolted back to harsh reality for a brief moment as he comprehended the gravity of his situation. He was utterly alone, with no jerry can in his vehicle to collect petrol and no clear idea of his whereabouts or how far he might be from help. In his daze to leave home, he had absent-mindedly forgotten his phone, leaving him without the means to call for assistance. With a flicker of hope, he popped the hood of his car, hoping that a passing motorist might notice the open hood and recognize that he needed assistance, willing to stop and help him out of this predicament. Time seemed to stretch on indefinitely as he waited, each passing moment heavy with anticipation, and it felt like hours before any vehicle finally approached. However, the first few cars sped by without even slowing down, leaving him feeling increasingly vulnerable and isolated in the vast emptiness around him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, Harley got lucky. A delivery driver pulled over to offer assistance, breaking the oppressive silence of the road. The driver, Arlie, hadn't been behind the wheel of the delivery van for very long, and he also hadn't been in Australia for that long. He had been fortunate enough to have family living in the country who could sponsor him, allowing him to journey from Pakistan to this unfamiliar land filled with new opportunities. Initially, upon arriving in Australia, Arlie found work in a potato factory, where the hours were long and tedious, forcing him to stand in one spot for much of the day sorting through mountains of potatoes, throwing out the bad ones while carefully sorting the rest by size for packaging. It was a monotonous job. But throughout the tedious process, He kept reminding himself that if he persevered and dedicated himself to this line of work, he would eventually be able to save enough money to purchase his very own delivery van. Arlie was aware of a significant shortage of drivers needed to transport the potatoes to market and was determined to become a part of that solution, taking every shift he could manage. He diligently sent some money back home to support his family while saving the rest for his long-desired delivery van. Arlie went through the necessary steps to obtain the correct license for driving a van before considering purchasing one, then meticulously scoured the marketplace until finding the perfect vehicle that fell within his budget. Once he had secured the van, he gathered the courage to approach his boss at the potato factory, asking him if he could transition from working on the line to becoming a driver instead, to which his boss surprisingly agreed without hesitation, opening the door to a new chapter in his life. Arlie was ecstatic. After all, he had finally leapt from the monotonous potato line to a job that paid better and brought him genuine enjoyment and fulfillment. He had always had a passion for driving, relishing the feeling of being behind the wheel, and he particularly enjoyed listening to the talkback programs on the radio, which were entertaining and seemed to help improve his English skills in a fun and engaging way. Known for his cheerful and helpful nature, Arlie was always eager to lend a hand whenever the need arose. This weekend was his day off, and he thought it would be the perfect opportunity to visit one of his friends working in one of the picturesque vineyards in the countryside. So, with enthusiasm bubbling inside him, Arlie hopped into his trusty delivery van and set off on the drive to see his friend. He was on this journey when he noticed a car parked on the side of the road, its hood propped open, instantly piquing his curiosity. Without a second thought, Arlie pulled over to assist whoever might be in need. He wandered over to Harvey, the car owner, and inquired about the problem. Harvey explained he had unfortunately run out of petrol, prompting Arlie to draw on the skills he had honed in his free time. He quickly pulled out his phone to check the nearest petrol station, skillfully navigating the maps to find one that did not take him too far off his intended route. Arlie located the closest station just off the highway and relayed the good news to Harvey, explaining that while it wasn't too far out of his way, it would still take about half an hour to get there. He then proposed that if he drove him to the petrol station, Harvey could take an Uber back to his car with the petrol once they filled up. Harvey expressed his gratitude, stating that it would be a tremendous help since he could then purchase a jerry can to store the petrol, assuring Arlie that he didn't want him to go out of his way but was simply thankful for the assistance. Harvey nodded in agreement and reached for his wallet, keys, and medical bag before climbing into the delivery van's cab. Arlie truly enjoyed the company of others. He loved to chat and took every opportunity to practice his English, believing that conversation was one of the best ways to improve his skills. As he chatted away with Harvey, who was seated beside him, he couldn't help but notice that Harvey appeared to be in a world of his own, sitting quietly with a distant look in his eyes. While he listened to Arlie's lively chatter, it was as though Arlie's voice had transformed into a faint echo in the background, much like someone trying to engage you in conversation while you're intensely engrossed in a captivating movie on TV. Although Harvey did respond appropriately to Arlie's comments, he offered very little information about himself, seemingly preferring to keep his thoughts to himself. In his mind, Harvey was fixated on his mission, one that didn't involve returning to his car with petrol. Rather, he was determined to drive, but not in the way Arlie imagined. Eventually, Harvey turned to Arlie and mentioned that he needed to go to the toilet, asking if Arlie could pull over to the side of the road so he could relieve himself. Without hesitation, Arlie complied, pulling over in a safe spot. As Harvey got out, Arlie noticed him taking his medical bag with him, prompting Arlie to raise a hand and reassure him that he didn't need to worry about his possessions, insisting that he would be completely trustworthy. However, with a slight smile, Harvey simply replied, "No, I need paper, mate," which prompted Arlie to nod in acknowledgement, assuming that was all there was to it. While Harvey was behind the bush, he stealthily retrieved a syringe from his medical bag, along with a vial of tranquilizer, and carefully drew up a lethal dose that he had calculated would effectively kill Arlie. He placed the syringe gingerly into his shirt pocket, concealing it from view before returning to the van with his bag, a facade of normalcy masking his sinister intent. Meanwhile, Arlie was blissfully unaware, still basking in the joy of the moment, smiling and singing along to a catchy song on the radio, completely lost in his happiness. He didn't even notice when Harvey had stealthily taken the syringe out of his top pocket and jabbed the needle into his thigh with swift precision. The entire sequence unfolded so quickly that Arlie found himself abruptly jolted out of his blissful state, staring at Harvey in shock as he exclaimed, "What the fuck, man?" Instinctively, he pulled the van over to the side of the road, his mind racing as confusion and alarm surged through him. Arlie shot out of the car, acutely aware that he was in a desperate situation, and sprinted into the dense scrub, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. Yet, despite his frantic escape, he didn't get very far. Exhaustion began to creep in, and he quickly grew drowsy, losing his footing on the uneven terrain and ultimately collapsing to the ground with a soft thud. Meanwhile, Harvey ambled over, his mind racing as he contemplated the irony of the perfect spot Arlie had unwittingly chosen for such a tragic fall. As he observed the stillness of the scene, Harvey couldn't help but recall the last moments of Arlie's life, vividly remembering how joyful and carefree Arlie had appeared just moments before disaster struck. Determined to preserve that fleeting sense of happiness, Harvey opened his medical bag slowly, methodically retrieving a scalpel. He carefully cleared a small area beside Arlie's face, his eyes wandering until they landed on some smooth, colorful rocks nearby, which he gathered and arranged in a circle, creating an artist's palette that contrasted sharply with the grim reality of the situation. Carefully, he meticulously removed Arlie's lips, shaping them into a serene smile and placing them within the circle of stones. Then, using a slender stick, he dragged a smile beneath the lips, enhancing the eerie expression. Finally, he turned his attention to Arlie's eyes, gently extracting them and placing them on his macabre palette, transforming a tragic scene into a grotesque work of art. He artistically drew 2 circles around each eye with his slender stick and added 2 eyebrows. He sat and looked at his creation for a moment. Then Harvey decided he should have a nose in the middle, which he removed from Arlie's face. He thought that should suffice, but then he had another idea, so he cut a zigzag across Arlie's neck, then another zigzag about an inch below. Harley carefully removed this piece of skin and put it on top of his artistic impression, creating a face with hair on top. He felt a peculiar sense of satisfaction with this grisly achievement, a twisted pride in his handiwork that both exhilarated and disturbed him. After a moment, he picked up some nearby leaves, their vibrant greens starkly contrasting with the dark crimson stains on his surgical tool. He meticulously wiped away the blood, each stroke a deliberate act of cleansing. Once he had removed the worst of the remnants, he reached into his bag and retrieved an alcohol swab, the sterile packaging crinkling in his hands as he opened it. He carefully cleaned the tool, ensuring that every trace of his gruesome task was eradicated. He then placed it back in its designated spot in the bag with a sense of order and purpose that seemed almost ritualistic. With that done, he turned his attention to Arlie's lifeless form, reaching into the pockets of the clothing that now seemed so foreign and still. He deftly extracted the keys and wallet, feeling their weight in his hands, a tangible reminder of the life he had snuffed out. Satisfied with his collection, he returned to the delivery van, each step measured and deliberate. As he hopped into the vehicle, he felt an odd sense of calm wash over him, and he started the engine with a turn of the key, the sound of the motor roaring to life punctuating the silence around him. With a final glance in the rearview mirror, he pulled out onto the road, continuing on his journey. Harvey's twisted mind felt an unsettling happiness as he reflected on how Arlie had met his end on such a beautifully bright day, the sun shining with an almost ironic cheerfulness. He continued to drive along the winding roads, the landscape shifting from vibrant greens to deep oranges and purples in the sunset until darkness enveloped the surroundings and the stars twinkled in the clear night sky. Finally, Harvey pulled off the main highway, seeking a quiet spot to park the delivery van. With practiced ease, he lay down the seats to create a makeshift bed, curling up in the cramped space. For the first time in a long time, he drifted into a deep sleep, the kind of slumber that enveloped him like a comforting blanket, free from the nightmares that usually plagued his mind. When morning broke, the The first light filtering through the van's windows stirred him from his restful slumber. He awoke feeling a gnawing hunger in his stomach, a reminder that he hadn't eaten in what felt like ages. After gathering his bearings, he heads back to the highway, the engine humming steadily beneath him. At the next service station, he stopped with anticipation, eager to satisfy his cravings. He ordered himself a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs, accompanied by a steaming cup of coffee, which he devoured with surprising speed, not fully realizing how long it had been since he had last eaten. As he finished his meal, he grabbed a bag of crisps and a cold drink for the road, ensuring he was well prepared for the journey ahead. After filling the van with petrol, he paid for it all with Arlie's card, a smirk playing on his lips as he relished the twisted sense of freedom that came with it. With a full tank of petrol, he felt confident that he would surely get further this time, ready to progress on his journey. As he drove along, the rhythmic sound of the road beneath him, the constant rumbling of tires on asphalt, began to lull him into a false sense of security, wrapping him in a comforting cocoon of familiarity. However, his tranquility abruptly shattered when he noticed the temperature gauge on the dashboard had turned a vivid red, and wisps of steam began to rise ominously from the bonnet. Ignoring the warning signs, he pressed on for a bit longer, but after 20 minutes, the vehicle emitted a terrible sound, forcing him to pull over to the side of the road. Frustration boiled within him. He was so angry that this had happened again. Car trouble was an unwelcome companion he had faced before, and with a resigned sigh, he popped the hood and leaned against the car, surveying the engine with a sense of helplessness. Harvey didn't want to waste any more time waiting idly by the side of the road, so he opened up his trusty medical bag and tossed Arlie's wallet and keys inside. Remember to like, subscribe, and share to others, so you don't miss an episode.